Assalamu alaikum. You are a modern Muslim woman, ambitious, devoted, and honestly sometimes exhausted from trying to be all things to all people. Welcome to the Thriving Muslim Woman podcast, the show where we stop chasing impossible standards and start reclaiming the peace and power already written into our divine design. We blend spiritual truths with practical mindset tools to help you redefine success on your own terms. It's time to nurture your soul while elevating your life. I'm your host, Danielle LoDuca. Let's begin. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. I am really excited about this episode because it's such a powerful concept. We're going to talk about a kind of paradox that true power is actually found in surrender or submission. So, what if the one thing that you've been told over and over again is a weakness, surrender, or submission is actually the key to unlocking your greatest strength and your freedom? So before we begin, I have a few invitations to make for you. First of all, I would like you to check in with yourself. How are you feeling right now in this moment? Are you feeling present? Is there a lot on your mind? And if you find that there's a lot on your mind, maybe you're thinking of something that happened in the past or you're thinking about the future, try to bring yourself into this present moment, maybe by taking a deep breath or just noticing your surroundings or noticing how you're feeling in your body today. And then I have two more invitations for you. As you listen to this episode and any other episode on our channel, you have the opportunity to listen and be open to possibility. That means that you might think you know why you clicked on this link, why you're listening to this video. You might think you know why you're here, but if you embrace possibility, that means that you'll be open to the idea that you actually have no idea why you're here today and why you're listening to this episode. So if you embrace that, then all sorts of possibility opens up for you, and you just don't know what you're going to get out of this. So that's my first invitation. The second invitation is as you listen to this discussion, which I hope will be interactive, you can comment. I'll see your comments, inshallah, and I will respond to them. I'm going to be reading them. So do, participate and let me know what's on your mind. React to, my questions and what I'm saying. But listening for insight is listening to think in a new way, listening for something new, something that makes you go, something you never thought of quite in that way before, right? And it means that you're not listening for agreement. I might say something that you agree with or that you like, and I might say something that you don't like or you don't agree with, right? But if you're focused on that, then you might not get the most out of this episode. So listening for insight is kind of like letting it wash over you and then seeing what comes up for you as you're listening. All right, so if you do that, that can ensure that you get the most out of this as well. All right, so the typical view of submission. We hear this word a lot, and a lot of times, especially in relationship to women, right? We hear the concept of being a submissive wife and things like that. And it's usually used in a negative connotation, right? It connotes weakness, it connotes giving up and powerlessness, right? Or restriction. But actually, according to our deen, Islam, submission is actually the ultimate conscious act of self-mastery. And it is the key to inner peace. And it is actually the key to unbound strength. It frees us, especially as Muslim women, from the external pressures and from our egos. So before we get started again, I would like to let you guys engage with me too. So I'd like to see in the comments, how are you feeling today? What's going on in your world? And is there anything where you feel kind of you're really gripping and holding on to, hoping for a certain outcome, like almost death gripping it, desperate for a certain outcome? It could be from something in your family life, right? Maybe in your marriage or maybe with your children. Maybe it's in your own personal life. Maybe you're hoping to achieve some sort of goal and you just can't accept the idea that it might not work out for you in the way that you want it to. So is there anything coming up for you? Is there a situation in your life right now where you feel like really, really attached to a certain outcome? So in my experience, I'm, alhamdulillah, a mother of 6 kids. When I think back to when the kids were really, really small, I can remember this intense pressure around things like bedtime, for example, or getting them out the door and into the car. It's like you really have to have a certain outcome. You want the kids in bed by a certain time, and forget it. If they're not cooperating, what happens? You start to feel frustrated. You start to feel stressed, right? And that stress and that frustration and that anxiety is coming from the feeling of wanting to be able to control the outcome and control things essentially that are out of our control. So I'd love for you to take a moment to think, what in your life right now is causing you anxiety? Where are you feeling stressed, right? And if you can attach that, does that feeling attach to your reliance on a particular outcome? Right. So for me, when my kids were little, it was like I wanted them to be in bed by a certain time. Once it passed 7:30, I started getting anxious. If they wanted to read another book, or they didn't want to lay down in their bed, or they weren't brushing their teeth, frustration would just build and build and build. And so every night was an exercise in anxiety, because things never really would work out exactly as I wanted them to. And that is the source of that stress. So there are other, this happens across the board. It happens in parenting. It happens at work. It happens, in all areas of our lives where we really desire to control things that actually are not within our control. So where in your life do you feel most compelled to control? Think of an area and then hold that thought. So Islam, the religion of Islam, the meaning of the actual word Islam indicates submission and surrender, right? What does submission and surrender mean? It means that we are surrendering our will to the will of God, that we are submitting to His complete and perfect knowledge, His complete and perfect power, and acknowledging that we are not in control, that we are not in power, right? And that His guidance is perfect, that He knows and we don't know. And also understanding that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is good, fundamentally, through and through good. And so anything that He does is fundamentally good as well. So when we say we are Muslims, it means that we are submitters, or we are surrenderers, submitting and surrendering to God's perfect will and knowledge and guidance. But surrendering our will to God isn't a passive act. It's actually the ultimate act of self-mastery. Hence, the fact that this whole life is a test, right? Because we're going to be being tested on how good we show up to that call to surrender to God. Amazingly, there are concepts in neuroscience, concepts in psychology that explain why surrendering and submitting are actually beneficial and are freeing to us. So for example, the concept of the cognitive load, maybe you've heard of that, right? When you're constantly trying to control, and it leads to chronic mental fatigue and stress. High cortisol in the body, right? The stress chemicals that are released in the body and create a lot of anxiety and put you out of your parasympathetic nervous system, where you're resting, digesting, and your body can heal, into your sympathetic nervous system, where it's basically fight or flight. So too many of us, I see this all the time with the women that I work with, operating in that sympathetic nervous system on a 24/7 basis, basically, like constantly under stress and pressure. And that is not how we are meant to exist. It's unhealthy for us. Our bodies are not made to live in constant stress. We need to have short moments of stress where we then recover and we switch back over into the parasympathetic nervous system. So constantly having this cognitive load of attempting to control outcomes creates that chronic stress in our body and will ultimately impair us mentally, emotionally, and even physically, can create disease in the body. Another one is decision fatigue, right? When every single thing that you're presented with in life, you have to make a decision on it, and you're not sure, like, what's the basis? What are the parameters to be able to, guiding you to make this decision? That leads to decision fatigue. And this is famously explained with people who are in very high levels in business, CEOs. They reduce their decision making. For example, choosing to wear the same outfit every day, to just remove one decision from their plate so that they can have energy to apply to more important decisions, right? And alhamdulillah, in Islam, some of the decisions are already prepared for us. We have that guidance to help us make decisions, right? So when we use it, it'll help reduce this problem of decision fatigue and help us have the energy to make really important decisions that count. So submission and surrender, reliance on God, is a powerful cognitive offload mechanism. When we leave the outcome, leave the result in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands, in God's hands, this offloads that cognitive load. It shifts the locus of control for the final outcome from ourselves, from our burdened ego, to the ultimate power, the one who's in charge and controls everything, freeing up mental bandwidth for true impact. So if you are trying really hard to achieve something in your life right now and you're finding it difficult, this is where you want to check in. How much energy are you spending trying to force the outcome? Being so invested in getting a particular result that you're actually draining your own energy. So this concept, right, you notice that in Islam, people are called Abdullah, slave of Allah, slave of God. And that is, we typically think of slavery as a bad thing, right? It has a negative connotation in our world. When we think about slavery, we think of people who are oppressed. We think of people who are mistreated. We think of people who have no control, who have no, agency over themselves. But in Islam, that's simply not the case. Abdullah, the slave of Allah, is an honored name. It's an honored position to be in. And it's something that all of us are striving for, right? We're working for that. And the more and more we master our own selves, the closer we will become to being a slave of God. But there are a lot of pressures on us, right, in the world. Pressures to be the perfect mother, for example, the perfect wife, even the perfect Muslim, right? There's a lot of pressure if you go out in the world to show up in a certain way, and you feel like you're going to be judged for how you're dressing, be judged for how you're praying, be judged for how you're speaking or standing, And if you're a mother, how many activities are your children in? How many meals have you cooked today? Right? What time are your kids in bed? Are they all bathed? Are they wearing fresh clothes every day? Right? If you have a business, there's pressure to succeed, right? Pressure not to make mistakes. So there's so many social expectations on us from our cultures and from society. And this results in a sort of perfectionism, which is another huge pressure, draining our energy. We're also often slaves to competition, slaves to comparison, right? So I'm showing you here how you can be enslaved by different things. We can be enslaved by this idea of perfectionism and this obsession with how how other people see us and how they may judge us and what they may think and whether or not we're meeting certain marks, often marks that we haven't even chosen on our own. They've kind of been decided for us, or we're assuming that we have these certain standards we have to meet, right? Or we're being a slave to comparison, where we're racing, trying to keep up with everyone else's highlight reel, you know? I see this a lot again with my clients, where they'll be making so much progress in their life. They'll lay out all of their goals, right? They know exactly what they want. They've defined who they want to be. They're on track. And all it takes is one, bout of Instagram to kind of shatter that all down. Or one meeting at the car line at the school with another mom who's doing something that they feel like, oh, maybe I should be doing that. Or why am I not as good at XYZ as she is, right? And they start comparing themselves. And then suddenly all the effort that they've been putting in feels worthless, right? So we have to be very careful what we enslave ourselves to. And what this, I hope, is showing you guys is that we enslave ourselves to something, one way or another. We're a slave to the societal expectations. We may be a slave to the pop culture. We may be a slave, like I said, to comparing ourselves with other people, and obsessing over everyone else's accomplishments and their highlight reels, and then judging and constantly judging ourselves and trying to live up to that. What if we let go of the results? So tawakkul, reliance upon God, is not inaction, right? A lot of the times controlling the outcome we feel like if we're doing the right actions, we will get the right result. We get obsessed with that. I have to take all the right actions. I have to move forward. I have to do it this way, right? And if I do 100%, it has to turn out the way that I want it to turn out. And we have a lot of difficulty letting go and understanding that there are things in this world, in this life, that are simply out of our control. We have a lot of struggle with that. So if you've ever struggled with that, let me know in the comments. Have you struggled with a situation of maybe loss? Maybe someone you love passed away. Maybe you've experienced illness, or someone you love has experienced illness, right? Or maybe you've lost a job, or not gotten hired for a job, or lost a child, or waited longer than you hoped to get pregnant, or waited longer than you hoped to get married, or maybe your marriage didn't work out, right? What happened? What has happened in your life where you felt super attached to getting a certain outcome, a certain result, and you found it very difficult to let go of that? Let me know in the comments. Oftentimes, we think that if we take action, we will get those results. And when we take action and we don't get the results we want, we often feel a feeling of injustice, like it's not fair. And we worry about being lazy, being inactive, or it being our fault that things didn't turn out the way that we had hoped, right? So what I want to present to you here is that relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawakkul, is not inaction. But in fact, we can actually focus our efforts in a beautiful way and then fully surrender to the outcome. So we can put in tons of effort. And the beautiful thing, and we mentioned this in the last episode, is that none of those efforts actually go to waste, right? So even if we have an outcome that was unwanted or different than we had hoped for or expected, the effort that we put in, as long as we are aligned with our ultimate purpose in life, and especially if we're doing our actions for the sake of our Creator and trying to have that successful outcome in this life, then none of our actions that we put in are going to waste. They're all important. They're all valued. And to me, that is such a beautiful concept, because what's worse than putting in a bunch of effort only to finding that it didn't work, right? It was a failure. How many people stop moving forward because they put in effort and it doesn't work out how they wanted to, and they give up? That's literally the difference between people who are entrepreneurs and people who, give up or let go of their businesses, for example, because it means you have to be able to accept failure, things not going as expected, and try again and do it again and continue moving forward, right? There's a certain there's a special element, and we're going to get to this later. It's called grit, that enables us to continue to get back up after falling down and to try again. But one of the ingredients in that recipe has to be this tawakkul, and understanding that your efforts matter. They're valued. They're valuable, even if they don't produce the exact outcome that you were hoping from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that whoever relies upon Allah, then He is sufficient for him. Imagine that. What are we looking for in life? Satisfaction, happiness, contentment, right? But Allah already told us the recipe to get that. It's through relying on Him. So what we should be actually focusing our attention on isn't trying to get that specific outcome and force that outcome. Instead, it should be, how do I rely on Allah in this? How can I better leave the outcome to Him and trust and rely on Him? And with trust means that even if that outcome isn't as I had wanted or hoped, it could still be the best thing ever for me. So let's break this idea down that submission to God is actually the truest form of freedom. Because it kind of sounds backwards. Let me know in the comments if that feels a bit weird to you. Like, how can I be free if I'm enslaved? How can I be free if I'm submitting myself to someone else? Because we're taught that freedom means doing whatever we want, right? And then this is such a big deal with Muslim women, because that stereotype about Muslim women is what? That we're not free, right? That we're oppressed because we can't do whatever we want, right? If you just look at how we're dressed, look at that. What's that thing on your head, right? Why are you wearing those loose clothes? You can't do whatever you want. You must not be free, right? And all of the quote unquote rules that we have in Islam, people often perceive them as a lack of freedom. Why do you have to do this way? Why do you have to do that way? Why can't you do whatever you want? You poor thing. But this is where the paradox lies. So when we're trying to control every outcome, every result, whether it be our career success, our child's behavior, our relationship status, we're actually slaves to a very harsh and unpredictable master, our ego, and the expectations of the world. Maybe you've experienced the harshness of this. I mean, I was not a Muslim when I was born. I was born in a Catholic family. And I remember so vividly the pressure as a girl to look a certain way, to wear certain clothes, to have a certain type of body, to even have a certain type of nose, to have a certain haircut, to talk a certain way, to have a certain number of friends. There were just so many social pressures on me. It was overwhelming. And the result was that I never felt good enough. I never felt like I measured up. And looking back on it, I realized how impossible some of those pressures that I put on myself were. Like, I can't change my bone structure. I can't change my nose, right? Those were things that were given to me that I was born with. They're not a result of my effort. And instead of being grateful for them, for those things that I had been given, I spent years wishing that they could be different. This is just an example of how when we are enslaved to the expectations of the world and our own egos, it's actually a form of oppression, right? Slavery to the ego. The ego is constantly telling us that you must achieve this. You must look like that. If this fails, you're a failure. And what these kinds of thoughts lead to is crippling stress, burnout, and constant fear. So is that peace? Is that a peaceful way to live? Absolutely not. You lose your peace trying to manage the unmanageable. So again, if you think about a situation in your life that's creating some anxiety, where are you putting your attention on things that are outside your control? Things that are actually unmanageable, but you're putting tons of effort in, whether it's mental or physical, into trying to actually manage those outcomes. So we can kind of boil down this act of submitting and surrendering into a moment. And it's a moment where you have put in some effort towards a goal, right? You've done your best. And then you say, I've done my absolute best, and the rest is out of my hands. And you stop clinging to the result. When you do that, when you stop being attached with that death grip onto the result, the ego, your ego, loses its weapon and its grip begins to break. So that true freedom is actually the ownership you have over the effort that you put in and the release of the result. It's controlling and being in charge of and having agency over the things that you can change, the things that you can influence and control, and releasing the result, releasing what is out of your hands and what you could never actually possibly control. This is the core shift in perspective. As a Muslim, the freedom comes from dividing the world into two domains. So the freedom is freedom from anxiety. When you give the result to your creator, the one who has power over everything, you're immediately free from the anxiety of things you can't control. You performed your best in the moment, and that's success. And now all of your energy, all it has to go towards is understanding what is the best effort here. Like, is my goal correct? Are my efforts correct? Do they align with my ultimate desire to be successful in this life and the next, to meet my Lord in a way where I am pleasing to him and I'm pleased with him? Does it align with that, right? And then, will this action actually help me get towards the goal? And then trying to do it excellently. You know, what skills do you have to learn in order to do that well? What background knowledge do you need? What attitude do you need to bring? What emotion do you need to bring? Maybe you need to make sure that you're sleeping well at night and eating well, right? If you're getting all of these things within your control, you suddenly feel so powerful. Because now you're focusing on things that you actually have agency over, that you can change, and you can move the needle now, right? You can do that. Feels doable, doesn't it? And then you have the freedom to be present. So instead of worrying about the outcome, what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen tomorrow, what if this, what if that, you can actually put 100% of your focus, your love, and the quality into your current effort. So just hearing that, how does that feel? If you shifted away from trying to control the outcome and worrying about what's going to happen, if you just let that go, and instead you shifted and you focus all on your effort, putting quality into that, putting love into that, and your attention into that, being fully present, how does that feel? It feels very, very different. Imagine being fully present with your children, with your husband, with your family members, with your staff, with your workout, right? How many times you're exercising or putting in some sort of effort or going on a walk and your mind is completely somewhere else? But what if you could be present in that workout? How would that feel? Because the quality of the effort is literally your only job. Isn't that freeing? That feels so freeing to me. Like, just saying it feels amazing. I feel lighter just saying that right now. The other freedom that we're given through this is the freedom to fail and try again. Ladies, I speak to so many women who have been conditioned that they have to do everything perfectly. They have to get the straight A's. They have to get into the best school. They have to, their house has to be impeccable. Every meal they cook has to taste like, restaurant gourmet quality. They feel like a failure anytime they miss the mark. But what if I told you you're free to fail? Failure is a natural part of life. And if we never failed, we could never actually grow. We could never become better. We have to go through periods of struggle. We have to kind of fall down and miss the mark sometimes. That's part of the process of improving and growing. So if the result isn't what you'd hoped for, it doesn't have to crush you. You simply evaluate your effort, the thing that you're actually focusing on and in charge of, and you say, well, what can I do better next time? Right? Because you know that, inshallah, God willing, next time you can do it a little differently if you learn from this experience, and then you can try again, knowing that the overall plan is perfect, even if you don't see the full picture yet. So slavery is empowering when it's to our Creator. And it is disempowering and oppressive when it is to creation. And that is the big shift here. And so even though we're Muslims and we say on a regular basis that we submit our wills to God's will, where in your life, if you were to do an audit, if you were going to check through every aspect of your life, from your family life to your personal goals, your work, and your spirituality, your practice of Islam, where are you actually enslaving yourself to creation instead of your Creator? And if you're able to have that awareness and recognize where that's happening, it's really just a simple switch, isn't it? It's just a simple switch of intention and awareness, and then reminding yourself, checking in on a regular basis until, you eliminate the unwanted submission to creation. Because slavery to creation means that you're constantly chasing approval, you're chasing money, you're chasing status, or a specific outcome. You're a slave to the market, your critics, a slave to your fear. But when you surrender to the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it means that you're following a perfect set of instructions, His guidance, and you're entrusting your entire life journey to the one who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-merciful, and all-forgiving. We can't forget that. And that complete trust is the ultimate relief. What a blessing. What a gift. So when you submit your will to a perfect loving plan, you're no longer enslaved by the imperfect, chaotic demands of creation. And that is the true, powerful, and deeply restful freedom. So if you take a deep breath right now, I want to ask you a question. What's the impossible outcome that you're currently trying to control? And what profound peace would you gain by consciously and deliberately letting go of that result and focusing only on the effort that's yours to give? Let me know in the comments. So we've gone over how submission is not a passive thing. It requires a fierce commitment, and it does require moral strength. It really does, right? Like, being a Muslim is not easy. We're going to be challenged every single day. We're going to be tested by so many different things, from simple, like entertainment, or food, to much larger, difficult, challenging experiences in our lives. So whether large or small, we are going to be tested. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us this in the Quran as well. That, do you think you will say you believe and not be tested? And the people before us have also been tested, right? And so even with that, we have guidance on what to do about that, right? We ask God to protect us from and not burden us with tests and burdens that we're not capable of bearing, right? We ask, only give us the test that we can actually bear and then we can succeed in. And so if you make that dua, then you also are going to believe that whatever you're facing, it's possible for you to get through it. That the option for success, the option to thrive, is there for you. It's a possibility that's never off the table. So what does this require? It requires not just focus on knowing what your purpose is in life and understanding, who your creator is, why you've been placed here on earth. What's the goal here? What's the goal of the game? What's the point? What are you trying to do here? Right? That's the focus. But then you have to persevere and have patience throughout this test. And it's so important to differentiate between the passive waiting and the active act of patience, sabr, steadfastness while working. I remember hearing a story, I think this is like an old Arabic anecdote or something, where there were two men and they were doing a competition and they were biting on each other's finger. And, the one man was this really big, strong, accomplished man, everyone knew him as strong. His will was strong. He was powerful. He overcame people all the time. And the other man was just a regular average guy. And for some reason, they were going to bite each other's finger. And whoever gave up first, right, or yelled first, lost. And the weaker man, the perceived to be weaker man, is the one who won. And when he was questioned about it, he said he was just holding on just a little bit longer. And he was able to do that enough, just enough to overcome the man who was perceived to be stronger than him. And the example is supposed to show that, physical strength isn't everything. There's an importance in persevering and sticking with it, right? And we don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know how long we've been given on this earth. So we have to wake up every single day ready to power through. And patience and steadfastness and perseverance means that we stay really fixated and focused on the ultimate goal. So like anything that might happen in your life today, right? Maybe you're trying to cook and your meal burns. Maybe you're, get in a minor accident, something happens to your car breaks down, right? All the things that can happen, maybe you hit traffic. All of those things that can kind of be blockades or bumps in the road. When they happen, all we really need to do is have awareness of how that's affecting us. So, okay, I'm feeling frustrated right now. I feel anxiety building right now. I'm feeling angry, right? Noticing that shift in internal emotions and physical feelings that come with it. And when you notice those kinds of things, you're getting thrown off track, right? That's not the track you want to be on. If you could live in contentment and satisfaction and peace, you'd be on the track, right? That's what everybody wants. They wanted to relax. They want to experience some peace. When you feel like yourself going out of that mode into stress, that is like an alarm bell. It's a message. It's telling you, hey, something's going on here. And that's your cue, right? So now you can either go ahead and indulge in that experience, like, okay, I'm just going to get really angry. I'm going to yell my head off. I'm going to scream. I'm going to get frustrated. I'm going to indulge in that emotion. Or you can really use that emotion as a message instead and say, whoa, I see I'm getting frustrated. I'm feeling frustrated. Or I'm feeling angry here. What's going on? You can understand how the circumstances are impacting you, right? Like we said in the first episode, we were talking about how the circumstances are neutral, but what is in our control are our thoughts and our emotions. So whenever we feel like, oops, we're getting off track, we feel some kind of messenger coming to us, a certain emotion that isn't what we want to be living in, we don't want to be indulging in that emotion, then it's a reminder for us to correct course. Okay, why am I here? I'm here to please God. But my kids are really irritating me right now, right? Or my spouse isn't behaving in the way I want him to. Or I didn't get that promotion or that job that I wanted. Whatever is going on. I didn't want to hit traffic, right? But what's happening? What would be most pleasing to God in this moment? Is it screaming and yelling at your kids to do what you want them to do? Is that going to be something that you'll be so pleased with on the day of judgment as an action, right? Or is there a better way? So those emotions of frustration, of anger, of overwhelm, of anxiety, they're really messengers for us. They're there to kind of slap you in the face a little bit, so to speak, right? To wake you up. And then you have the opportunity in that moment to correct course and think about what would be most pleasing to God in this moment. And that as well can be very, very freeing. And it's another form of actually having patience, right? Because why do we get so upset when the kids are having a tantrum or they're not listening? Because we're trying to force the outcome. We're trying to control things that are out of our control. We can only control ourselves. We can control our thoughts. We can control our emotions because of the things that we think. We can control the way that we react to the circumstances in our lives. So this brings me to a really interesting concept called radical acceptance. So I was looking into this and I thought it was so interesting because it really relates to this idea of surrendering and submitting to God. And this is in like a cognitive behavioral realm. And I wanted to go over some of the suggestions that psychologists have to help you radically accept what is out of your control and kind of relate it back to how we have these tools already in Islam and how best to practice them. So to embrace radical acceptance, which is not always easy, by the way. So I've been talking all this time about, how wonderful it is to surrender and submit, but we have to remember that this is not something that is going to be easy. It definitely takes effort. But the point is that this effort is much more productive and much more beneficial and much more rewarding than trying to force results. So how do psychologists suggest that we embrace radical acceptance? They suggest that you start with paying attention to what triggers a feeling of resistance to being able to accept an outcome. So if you've ever had a certain loss or something didn't go well for you and you felt really attached and resistant to that outcome, like, how could this happen? This shouldn't have been the way it turned out. Why is this happening to me? Those kinds of questions mean that you have this resistance to accept the reality, right? So when you notice that you can't accept something, and when it seems like you're fighting against what's happening, that means that thing is a trigger. So you want to pay attention and start to learn, what are the triggers for you? And then in that moment, when you feel that resistance, you can remind yourself that reality can't be changed, right? What's already happened has already happened. It cannot be changed. So when we put all of our mental energy on rethinking an event, going over it again and again and again, trying to change the outcome in our minds, we have to stop and remember that it's not in our control. We have to accept that we have a lack of control and realize that the causes of the reality are outside our agency. So then you can think about what you would do if you could accept what happened. Like, if you did accept what already happened, what would that look like? What types of behaviors would you do then? What types of thoughts would you be thinking then? What types of feelings would you have? And that starts to give you kind of like a compass of the direction to head in. Then psychologists say that you can imagine what things would be like if you accepted the situation. Right? So imagine yourself accepting it. Maybe you'll imagine yourself feeling a sense of peace, a calm. And a way to actually implement this is to use relaxation strategies. So one of the simplest relaxation strategies that we have is breathing. It's amazing how if you just elongate your exhales, so if you take a nice deep breath in, you can try it right now, and then elongate that exhale, sometimes double the inhale. So you can inhale for 4 and then exhale for 8, for example. That actually signals to your nervous system that everything's okay. It's okay to calm down. It's okay to relax. It's okay to rest. And you can use that because that signals that relaxation to your nervous system, which will help you physically relax, which will aid in you mentally relaxing. Other relaxation strategies are journaling, self-reflection, and mindfulness practices. So maybe you can share here, what are some of the practices that you use to relax? And you can also, this is also really beneficial, right? So if you're facing something really challenging in your life, another tool is to actually look at your life and your history and say, well, where did I overcome a challenge before? Maybe something similar, maybe something that I felt really difficult in the moment, but I was able to overcome that challenge or that loss or that circumstance that was just not desirable. I overcame it before. That helps to build that feeling of self-efficacy. I can do it again, right? The next one is let go of judgment and allow yourself to safely feel your emotions. How many times are we told, like, how many times if you're crying, you apologize? I'm sorry. Sorry about my tears, my feelings. We're taught to kind of apologize for them, right? And some people, they work so hard, use so much energy to hide their emotions, to hide their sadness, to hide their anxiety, their fear, and even anger, right? Because we often judge ourselves for feeling those emotions. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I upset, right? So let go of judgment. We all have emotions. Being a human means having emotions. And our emotions are actually incredibly powerful messengers for us. They serve a purpose. So when we stuff them down and we try to shove them away or pretend they don't exist, we're missing out on those important and valuable messages every time. So let go of judgment. Don't judge yourself. Let the tears flow. It's okay. And when you're okay with it, don't forget that you're actually modeling that for others as well. So if you're a mother, right, or if you're in a role like some of the women I work with are teachers, modeling that I can have emotions and I can still be a fully functioning human, right? I can have a day where I feel sad and I can actually overcome that. I have the tools. And you model that for your children or you model that for your students. Very powerful lesson. And actually in a call I said yesterday, I think that's a more important lesson than some of the math and the history and the science that we teach in schools, right? So imagine if on a regular basis you can model that, yes, I'm a human with emotions and I embrace them and I let myself experience them and then I reorient myself towards my goals and I put effort in that positive direction. I don't spend time berating myself or trying to pretend I don't have feelings, wasting my energy and all that stuff. I think that's a beautiful thing to model. And a lot of us having those struggles in our life and wasting so much energy on this is because that wasn't modeled to us as children. We were told, don't cry, stop crying, right? And this is especially true for men. So if you're a woman listening to this, how can you support the men in your life to also let go of judgment against themselves for their emotions? Or are you judging them if they show their emotions? So how can you make a place of safety in your home, in your life, for not only yourself, but for the other people that you love to experience their own emotions, right? And then amazingly, the emotions resonate in the body. So I'll often ask my clients, where do you feel that, right? It's often in the chest or in the stomach or in the throat. You might feel tightness or pain or restriction, right? Emotions resonate inside the body, and being aware of that is really valuable as well when it comes to being able to shift those emotions. And then we need to accept that life can be worthwhile even when we are experiencing pain. Alhamdulillah, see, this is one of the things where, this is what psychologists are recommending. But in Islam, isn't that always the case, right? Life is always worthwhile even when we're experiencing pain, because every experience we go through is an opportunity for us to connect to our Creator in the best way and to devote ourselves to Him entirely. And when we submit to things that haven't gone our way, that's actually incredibly powerful. Like you might remember I believe it's a hadith Qudsi. I could be wrong on that, but there's a hadith where, it is a hadith Qudsi, I believe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked the angels who took the soul of the child of a Muslim, right, a believer. And He asked them, what happened when you took the beloved from my slave? And they said that he praised you. And I'm just paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me. I'm just remembering off the top of my head. But that person who lost their child, he praised God and was grateful to Him, right? Even in the face of that loss. And it shows how God is incredibly pleased with that. So if we can embrace and if we can accept that life is always worthwhile, even when things are not going the way we want, even when we're experiencing pain, that is so incredibly powerful. Imagine how hard it is to do without having Islam. And this is where I think we should just take a moment and be really grateful and thankful that we have been given guidance, that we have been told about who created us, about why He created us, and about what our ultimate purpose is. Where are we headed? Where are we going? What is this all about? Every day I have to wake up and I have to do all this stuff, and then I have to go to sleep and I got to wake up again. I got to go through pain. I got to get sick. I got to go to work, right? I got to struggle. I have to have, challenging relationships. I got to fail. Why? Every day, again and again and again and again. But alhamdulillah, as Muslims, we know why. We always know why. We don't have to numb ourselves with music. We don't have to numb ourselves with games and TV and substances, right? because we know that every single experience has a purpose and is valuable if we just make it that way, right? It's all about our perception and our intention. And we can make things worthless by the way that we, if we treat it like it's nothing, it's not important, I'm not doing this for any reason. If we do it for God, everything becomes ultimately valuable, exponentially valuable beyond our wildest dreams. So the last thing that psychologists encourage is to decide to commit to the practice of acceptance. And I feel like that's also part of just being a Muslim, right? And maybe this is an opportunity for you to kind of recommit that, yeah, I am a Muslim. When you say you're a Muslim, that means that you're submitting and surrendering to God's will. And you have all the power to make dua, to ask and supplicate and ask Him for all the things you want. But the ultimate outcome is in His hands. And you trust and know and believe in your bones that that outcome is the best thing for you, regardless of what it looks like on the surface. And so if you follow these steps, these can help you stop thinking about how things could have been and live more in the present moment. And it is a skill that gets better and better over time. So I'm going to give you a few ways to kind of recognize when you're not being in acceptance. And you can let me know in the comments if you can identify with any of these. And these are signals to you. So we talked a lot about how emotions can be messages. Thoughts can also be messages. So if you notice any of these, they're signaling that you're not accepting something. You're resisting acceptance. So if you ever say, I can't deal with this. This is not fair. Things shouldn't be like this. I can't believe this is happening. It's not right. Things should be different. Why is this happening to me? All of these thought patterns indicate a lack of acceptance. So if you've ever felt them before, if you've ever thought any of these thoughts before, that's what's happening here. You're not accepting the outcome of something. Now, there are feelings and behaviors that indicate lack of acceptance as well. Blaming yourself for everything bad that happens in your life. Feeling stuck and feeling like you can't improve anything, like nothing's going to change. Wishing that things were different, but feeling powerless, right? Spending a lot of time just wishing and hoping and, if only things were different, but I have no control over it. That's indicating a lack of acceptance. Being angry with the world is another one. Or resorting to maladaptive coping mechanisms like substance abuse, even, emotional eating is one of those. And that's very common. There are relationship patterns that reveal a lack of acceptance. So constantly nagging your spouse. Do you know that one? Anybody out there ever nag their spouse about something, hoping that they're going to change? If you just remind him one more time, maybe he'll change, right? How about being disappointed by the choices that other people make, right? If you're running a company or running an organization, it can be very frustrating sometimes that people make choices that don't align with the mission, that don't align with the ultimate goal, right? And this happens in our families as well. Our children can be very disappointing when they make choices that we don't agree with, that we feel we haven't taught them. Have you ever felt that one? This is a lack of acceptance. How about feeling resentful of things that have happened in the past? I know this one. This was something I had to do a lot of work to let go of, right? I realized that I was constantly reliving events of the past and just feeling resentful over the way that things turned out or over the way someone else behaved, right? And all that does is hurt yourself. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the other person. It only hurts yourself. If you tend to hold grudges against people, that's another indication that you are not accepting what is out of your control. So some ways to kind of foster this radical acceptance, other than, and we'll align these with what we have already in Islam. But it's understanding that when you fight against the negative emotions that you have, you're only actually fueling them to grow larger. So wherever you place your attention is what is going to grow, right? Think of it like feeding something. So if your emotions were, little animals or plants and you were feeding the anger is going to grow. If you're feeding that anxiety, it's going to grow. Feeding the sadness is going to grow, right? So when you're fighting against them, you don't want to fight them. That only fuels them, okay? So you want to just embrace them, accept them, and definitely looking at them as messengers for you is really helpful. And understanding and knowing that you can't change the things that have happened in the past. So what are you doing? Spending your time thinking about them again and again and again and again, over and over again. You need to replace that loop with something else. So the loop is going to exist because that's a neurological pathway. So you have a pathway in your brain. You keep thinking of that thing. You're reminded of it. You relive it. And then it's going to go on and on. You need to replace it with something else. So maybe when you're triggered to think of something that happened in the past that would normally be kind of something that would trigger a negative emotional response and maybe keep you in that loop, instead, you can switch to thinking about something else. What I love, this is really fascinating because if you have, let's say there's someone in your life that really gets on your nerves, right? You're getting frustrated because no matter how much you tell them, whatever, they're not going to change. They're not going to change their behavior. They keep doing those things you don't like again and again and again, disappointing you, whatever it is. Now, imagine if when you got triggered to think about that person in that negative way, instead of thinking about them in the negative way, you start thinking about, well, what do I like about this person? What do I appreciate about them? What am I grateful for about this person, the one that gives me so much of a hard time? What do I appreciate about them? And you switched your brain to think about that. That would create a new loop in your brain. Now, even when you're triggered to think about that person because they, left the toilet seat up or they put the toilet paper the wrong way or they, did something you didn't like, they didn't put their shoes on fast enough, you're going to instead be like, well, you know what? I'm really grateful for this person. That's going to immediately shift your emotions and how you think about that person and how you feel about them and then how you treat them. And then it's going to change the whole outlook of your entire day. If you can do that again and again, noticing your triggers, swapping out those unhelpful thoughts, that resent and the rumination over things that happened in the past that you have no control over, into gratitude. That's just like a blanket answer for everything. You can use gratitude in all areas of your life. And science actually shows how much it improves your overall well-being. Not just your mental well-being and your emotional well-being, your physical well-being can be impacted by focusing on gratitude. So swap out those unhelpful thoughts that you cannot change, those things in the past you can't change, and then swap it out with something good. Now, remind yourself that you can accept things in the present moment exactly as they are, knowing that it's possible. Right? That you can get through difficult emotions, even if it's hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard. And remembering times you've done it in the past is also very, very powerful. And then you can believe and trust that you can get through it with God's help. This is where in Islam we have the extra level, right? We can ask Allah, our creator, the all-powerful, the all-merciful, to help us. We can rely on him. Imagine if, you were struggling and suffering to walk, for example, and someone came with a chair with wheels and put you on it and carted you, right? And pushed you and made it easy for you to get wherever you were going. Or you were trying to climb a ladder and something came and just lifted you all the way up, right? When you rely on God, it's like putting your effort into relying on him instead of forcing that outcome. There's so much ease and so much peace in that. And that determination to get through it in the best way possible is very powerful. And knowing that it's okay to feel anxiety and that you can still manage the situation in a bad way. So those are some of the recommendations. Now, what are some of the... Okay, this is an example I want to bring real quick. We have a lot of examples in Islamic history, alhamdulillah, but of this concept of persevering, of having patience, and trusting and relying on God. One of them is the story of Hajar, the wife of Ibrahim, who was left in the desert right? And the story goes that as he was leaving, she asked, "Were you commanded to do this?" And when he replied affirmatively, then she said, "Then Allah will take care of us." So even though the situation that she was in, left in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, was very, very undesirable, right? And I'm sure that would build up a lot of fear in any of us. She was able in that moment, knowing that it was a commandment from her Creator, to completely trust and rely on Him. And then even when her child Ismail was suffering with hunger and dehydration, right? She didn't just sit there and give up. She began running from one mountain to another in search of water. And as a result, Allah provided her with the well of Zamzam, which we still have today, right? A blessed well of water. And so this is one of the stories that we have of the unwavering patience and grit, which is perfected by reliance and trust in God. And it shows the spiritual and physical strength of surrendering and submission to Him. So we didn't have enough time to really get into the concept of grit, but essentially it means being able to kind of hold out for a delayed gratification. We have this ultimately in Islam. So nobody's got anything over us as Muslims when it comes to grit, because we have the ultimate long-term goal, right? This isn't related to short-term goals, like something you're going to accomplish tomorrow or next week or next year even. It's a big, huge, overarching long-term goal. Now, for Muslims, our goal doesn't even exist in this world, right? Even if you lived 1,000 years, you wouldn't reach the goal. The goal is in the afterlife, in the akhirah. You can't get better than that, okay? So the concept of grit, we've got it down. We have it. And it's just a matter of being patient and showing up again and again and again with passion as well. That's a part of grit, is having passion and perseverance. So the passion comes from loving our Creator, loving Him, relying on Him, knowing about who He is, how powerful He is, how perfect He is, how merciful, how kind, how generous that He is, and really being passionate about serving Him and worshiping Him and being pleasing to Him, right? To be doing these actions that we do with excitement, with energy, whether that's your daily prayers, whether that's fasting, whether that's dressing in a way that's pleasing to Him, whether that's maintaining peace and tranquility in your relationships at home, whether that's being a steward of the family, the trust that you've been given, your children or your work. And remember, this requires strength to maintain these principles, to be honest, to be truthful, to be just, even when it's costly, even when it's unpopular. And I like to think of this is one of the things that unites us as Muslims, as an ummah, as a global Muslim community. We're united with this commitment and this strength that it takes to stay committed and to maintaining these principles. And that means as an ummah, we are strong if we do that, right? We have this unbelievable strength. You know, even the scientists studying grit, they can't beat what exists in Islam, because no one can have a goal bigger than the afterlife, more long-term, right? So where is an area maybe that you've recently compromised on a small principle just to maintain control or to avoid conflict in your life? What have you kind of given up that was actually really important and you wish you would have stuck to it? It would have been stronger. It would have been more aligned with everything we've been talking about today if you had stuck with it. What strength would it take to submit to the truth the next time you have this issue? For me, this has been one of the things that I've lacked strength around, because being a patient and having to be in medical institutions and be treated by nurses and doctors, you know, I sometimes feel fearful when requesting that I have female staff handle me. And there have been a few times where, you know, there's been a male nurse and I feel really shy to say something about it. And so I'm going to commit today to be stronger moving forward in asserting my desire to be treated and handled by female staff whenever possible. So where's somewhere maybe you've compromised that you would like to be stronger on next time? You can make that commitment. If you want to share it in the comments, you can share it, or just keep it to yourself. And the next time that situation comes up, remember that you've made a commitment to yourself, right? And taking that action is for someone, do it for Allah, is someone much larger than you, than whoever it is you have to face in order to have that courage. Okay, so that would be your action step, to identify an area where either you're struggling for control and you want to consciously surrender to the result to God, or you want to take an action to be really strong and make a decision that aligns with your goals the next time. All right. So you can share in the comments your own goal where you want to trust and rely on Allah, or an action that you are going to commit to taking in a stronger way next time. So today we've been talking about how true power isn't actually about control, and it isn't about being in charge. It's actually about connecting to the source of all power, and that when we submit and surrender to Him, that is freedom, and that is ultimate mastery of the self. So I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides all of us to be true Muslims, to truly surrender our wills, our lives, our decisions to Him, and to trust and rely on Him, that the outcomes in our lives, whether they appear picture perfect or not in the world, that they are truly what could be best for us in the afterlife, for our souls' well-being. And I pray that Allah makes it easy for us to do that, and that He strengthens each and every one of us within ourselves, within our families, and across the global Muslim community, so that Islam can really be represented and present and flourish through us, through our families, for generation by generation, and that we can all be pleased on the day of judgment with our actions and with our books. So join us next week. Inshallah, we're going to be talking about going beyond the box, redefining the Muslim woman's role in a world of extremes. So we're going to look at reframing our roles as women and releasing the tension that exists between disempowering cultural concepts and misguided secular empowerment. It's going to be really fun, inshallah. So join me next time. Don't forget to subscribe to the FCAD Institute YouTube channel and catch a lot of amazing and really informative videos there on all different topics. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much for your participation, and tell all of your friends and family and share the videos in our channel with them, inshallah. And may Allah bless you. And I will see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.